I'm sorry. Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, I ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
And consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, each year the President presents a budget. It's the beginning of the formal conversation about what next year's budget will be, and each President presents their offering and their suggestion. Then, of course, the House and the Senate have to try to reach an agreement between them as to what the actual budget will be. The President suggests a bottom line in spending, and then the House and the Senate make appropriations decisions within that bottom line. And so today, President Obama kicked off this conversation by presenting his budget to America. He presented it at a time when he faces two very significant challenges: how to create more jobs and less debt. It's a tough balancing act, because we know to reduce the debt, we need to reduce spending. And what the President reminds us is, let's not cut spending in areas that are critical for the growth of our economy and the creation of good-paying jobs in America. The unemployment rate is about 9%. 13.9 million Americans are out of work. In Illinois, it's 9.3, with 620,000 people actively looking for jobs. Too many people want to work so they can keep a roof over their heads but can't find a job. At the same time, though, we have a $14 trillion debt. I hope that the Chair will forgive me for a little history, because I think it's worth noting when we talk about the debt of America how we have reached the point we are today. The fact of the matter is that 10 years ago, when President William Jefferson Clinton left office, the debt of America was $5 trillion. The President said to his successor, President George W. Bush, "The budget is in surplus as I leave office. We're collecting more money than we're spending in Washington, and we project a $120 billion surplus in the next fiscal year. Welcome to Washington, President Bush." Now fast forward 8 years later, the next transition from President George W. Bush to President Obama. What was the state of play? The national debt was no longer $5 trillion. 8 years later, it was $12 trillion. $12 trillion, and President George W. Bush said to President Obama, "Welcome to Washington. I can't give you a surplus, but I can give you a deficit of $1.2 trillion for the next fiscal year." In 8 years, what a massive turn of events. How did we go from a $5 trillion debt to a $12 trillion debt? How did we go from surplus to deep deficit in 8 years? Well, you do it by waging two wars that you don't pay for, being the first president in history to call for tax cuts in the middle of a war, and by creating programs such as the Medicare prescription drug program that's not paid for. Put those policies together and you end up with the sorry state of affairs that President Obama inherited. Now that deficit has grown from $12 trillion to $14 trillion because of the recession he inherited, and we are still struggling to get out from this mountain of debt that was created during the 8 years of the President George W. Bush administration and continues to this day. So President Obama is trying to strike the right balance. How do you responsibly go after a deficit that calls on us to borrow 40 cents for every dollar we spend, and at the same time not kill the economic recovery? So he's tried to parse out those things that he thinks, and I agree, are critical for economic growth: education, innovation, and building America's infrastructure. He's done it with this budget. I think done it in a responsible way. He calls for freezing our spending for 5 years, which will save us $400 billion off of the anticipated deficit. And he also talks about the same period of time reducing the amount of money for domestic discretionary spending to a level as a percentage of GDP where it was under President Eisenhower back in the 1950s. Now, we understand there's more to do, but I think the President sets out on a course that is responsible. We'll change it. We always do. But I think the goals he's given us are worthy goals. We know that we have to act on our fiscal situation. I was appointed by Majority Leader to be a member of the President's Deficit Commission. And with Erskine Bowles, a former chief counsel to the President, Alan Simpson, our colleague, former colleague in the Senate, Our bipartisan commission studied it for 10 months and came up with a proposal that we should deal with this budget deficit in a sensible way. And one of the things that they suggested, and I agreed with, was let's not cut too soon. If you cut too soon in some areas, you're going to spoil the recovery. You're going to slow down the recovery. You've got to make sure that the investments are there that will help us build jobs. Now, the House Republicans see things differently. They started off calling for cuts in spending and then were trumped within their own membership to raise those cuts to a level of about $100 billion. And among the things which the House Republicans want to cut are the following: $74 million from the Small Business Administration at a time when small businesses are turning to the SBA for loans so that they can stay in business and hire more people. $1.4 billion from the Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund that local communities use for basic infrastructure so that they have good, clean drinking water for the families in their communities. $600 million in Tiger II grants. These were grants that went directly from Washington to local units of government, no middleman involved in any state capital, for economic development. We need them in my state, in communities like Peoria and Moline. $2.5 billion from high-speed rail. That is a national project of significance that hires thousands of private sector employees who would be out of work if the House Republicans have their way. In education, the House Republicans would cut $1.1 billion from Head Start. How many people have to remind us that if we don't intervene in the lives of small children from families at risk, that those kids, sadly, may end up as poor students or worse? Head Start gives them a chance, and it's one of the first programs the Republicans called to cut. $700 million from schools across America serving disadvantaged students. They're going to have to lay off 10,000 teachers because of this House Republican cut. House Republicans also call for $845 per student cut from Pell Grants for 8 million college students across America. Mr. President, there's a way for us to make sure that Pell Grants are well spent, but cutting the assistance for these students will discourage some from the training and education they need to find the job of the future. $1.5 billion from grants to states for job training. Again, at a time when we need new skills, when many people have lost a job they can never return to, cutting this money could be very, very tragic. And then when it comes to research and development, I think the House Republicans have lost their way. They want to cut $300 million from the National Science Foundation, cutting grants to researchers, teachers, and students across America. $1 billion from the National Institutes of Health. What are they thinking? What are they thinking? To cut $1 billion in medical research funds from the National Institutes of Health? If there's ever an area where we cannot lose our edge, not only for the good of humanity, but for the good of our own people, it's in medical research. And that's one of the first areas the Republicans turned to cut $1 billion. And money from the Office of Science at the Department of Energy, $1.1 billion. That is research for innovation in areas such as batteries for electric vehicles and other forms of clean energy, and that is clearly the future. What the Republicans want to cut, sadly, is too much in areas that really do promise a better future for America. We can do better. Government can't directly create jobs at the pace that we need to get this economy back moving forward, but we can make the right investments. For example, in infrastructure. In Illinois, we need to make sure that we invest in high-speed rail. I'm glad that our state was chosen. It's going to mean more and more passenger service within our state, fewer cars on the highway, more construction. Ultimately, it's a benefit to the environment. So high-speed rail is an important infrastructure investment. Modernizing O'Hare Airport, not just for the flight times so that they will be more on-time arrivals and departures, but also for safety. The modernization of O'Hare needs to continue. We need to have safer roads and bridges. And we need broadband across Illinois and across America so that small towns have the same advantages as big cities. We need to put money into Head Start for education. We can do this. There's waste in this government to be cut. We can work on that together and find it. But let's not eliminate the jobs of teachers that we need so badly. The money for elementary and secondary schools, grants for families, loans to help them put their kids through college, in worker training. These are things where the President has the right priorities, and sadly the House Republicans do not. It's a sharp contrast. It's an important debate, and it's one that you'll hear on the floor of the Senate and in the House in the weeks ahead. We can reduce our debt. I think the President is right. His budget would reduce projected deficits by $1.1 trillion over the next 10 years. He wants to freeze non-security discretionary spending for 5 years, and I think he's shown leadership in making that proposal. We need to work with him to come up with a bipartisan plan that reaches our goal of reducing debt in America while still creating jobs. I went through that exercise with the Deficit Commission. I didn't agree completely with their product, but I thought that it was a move in the right direction and joined the bipartisan group of 11 who supported it. The Fiscal Commission report was called the Moment of Truth, and it was. With funding for the current fiscal year unresolved, with the next fiscal year looming, and with the debt ceiling within shouting distance, this is a seminal moment for the fiscal and economic future of America. I commend the President for his approach in the FY12 budget proposal. Just as America has faced down great challenges throughout our history, we can do this too. We can meet the dual challenges of more jobs and less debt. It takes leadership and constructive activism and realism. Bringing those together, Democrats and Republicans can work together to make equally painful but important political sacrifices. It'll take a lot of work, but we can do it if we work together. Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the efforts of the Court.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
President.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, I ask consent to call the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection, so ordered. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider the following nominations, which the clerk will now report.
Nominations, Judiciary, James E. Graves, Jr. of Mississippi to be United States Circuit Judge for the Fifth Circuit. Edward J. Davila of California to be United States District Judge for the Northern District of California.
Mr. President, understand there.
Under the previous order, there will be 1 hour of debate with respect to the nominations, with the time equally divided in the usual form.
President, I will not use all my time, but I did want to note that by starting the week considering two of President Obama's judicial nomination, the Senate is building on the progress we began to make last week. We do have in this country judicial vacancies remaining over 100. Worse yet, nearly half of them are judicial emergencies. So the Senate's action on the two outstanding nominees we consider today is much needed. I thank the Majority Leader for scheduling the time. I thank the Republican Leader for his cooperation. James Graves of Mississippi is a Justice of the Mississippi Supreme Court. He's been a judge in Mississippi for 20 years. President Obama nominated Justice Graves to fill a judicial emergency vacancy on the Fifth Circuit. When he's confirmed, he'll be the first African American from Mississippi to serve on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. Edward Davila has been a California state trial judge for 10 years. For 20 years before his service on the bench, he was a deputy public defender and worked in private practice. President Obama nominated Judge Davila to fill a judicial emergency vacancy in the Northern District of California. Now, both of these nominations were reported unanimously by the Judiciary Committee this year. But they're also both have been reported by the Judiciary Committee unanimously last year. So we've reported them out twice unanimously. It's time now to vote on them here. They were among the 19 judicial nominees that we had voted out unanimously or ready to be confirmed by the Senate last year before we adjourned. When there was objection, however, from the other side to proceeding last year, the vacancies persisted. The President renominated them. The Judiciary Committee reconsidered the nominations. We passed them out unanimously, all Republicans, all Democrats from the committee. And I expect the Senate will confirm them tonight and do so unanimously. Both have the support of their home state senators. I'll begin with Justice Graves. Both Senator Cochran and Senator Wicker have worked with the President and me in connection with the nomination of Justice Graves. Both have been enthusiastic in their support of Justice Graves. The governor of Mississippi, Governor Barbour, came up to me a few days ago at an event and urged me to move it forward. I told him I voted to move him out almost a year ago, and I'm all for it. But it's an example that this is somebody with bipartisan support. Senator Feinstein and Senator Boxer worked with the President and with me in connection with the nomination of Judge Davila. So I hope that by the votes we had last week and what we're doing tonight means we're going back to regular order, the regular order I've been seeking for months. If you have nominees that have been voted out unanimously by every Republican, every Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Committee, we ought to bring them up for a vote on the floor. My experience over 37 years, when you have somebody like that, 99.9% of the time, they also go through unanimously in the Senate. So we ought to do that. There are 2 of the 8 judicial nominees unanimously reported by the Judiciary Committee. They're currently ready for final consideration and final action by the Senate. And I hope that the other 6 judicial nominations to fill vacancies in Georgia, California, North Carolina, the District of Columbia can all be considered before the President's Day recess. Because as I indicated before, when these 2 nominees are confirmed, There's still going to be 100 federal judicial vacancies around the country, and that's too many. If you're a litigant and trying to get a case heard, you don't care whether a Republican or a Democratic president nominated somebody. You just want to make sure there's a judge there so your case can be heard. But all over the country, you can't get them heard because of the vacancies. That's why Chief Justice Roberts, Attorney General Holder, White House counsel Bob Bauer, and many others, including the President of the United States, have spoken out and urged the Senate to act. That's why the front page story in the Washington Post last Tuesday bore the headline, "Vacancies on Federal Bench Hit Crisis Point." Front page. As that report stated, vacancies are increasing workloads dramatically and delaying trials in some of the nation's federal courts. Finally, Mr. President, I ask consent to include in the record at the conclusion of my statement a copy of the Washington Post report on the judicial vacancies crisis.
Without objection.
You have to look at nearly 1 in 8 every federal judgeships across our nation, east to west, north to south, vacant. That means, as I mentioned earlier, Americans can't get a fair hearing in court. The real price for these unnecessary delays falls upon judges already overburdened with cases, unable to put the time into them they should. And the American people depend on our courts and being denied hearings and justice in a timely fashion. In contrast to the sharp reduction in vacancies during President Bush's first 2 years in office, the Democrats were in charge for only a year and a half of those first 2 years. We confirmed 100 of his judicial nominations, including a number that many Democrats were opposed to, but we confirmed them. First 2 years of President Obama's, only 60 of his judicial nominations were allowed to be considered and voted on. We haven't kept up with the rate of attrition, let alone brought the vacancies down. I mean, judges die, judges retire, judges reach an age where they shouldn't be sitting on the bench. There are vacancies all the time, and those vacancies should have been cut in half. Instead, they continue to hover at above 100. I believe the Senate can do better. In fact, I believe the Senate has to do better. The nation can't afford further delays by the Senate taking action on the nominations pending before it. Judicial vacancies on court throughout the country hinder the federal judiciary's ability to fulfill its constitutional role. They create a backlog of cases, prevent people from having their day in court, and that's unacceptable. I thank Senator Grassley, the Judiciary Committee's ranking member, and all the members of the Judiciary Committee for working with me at the start of this Congress to establish a fair and timely schedule for holding confirmation hearings, considering nominations in committee. Got to note that during President Bush's first term, 4 rather tumultuous years in office, we confirmed 205 as judicial nominations. 205. 105 of them done in the 2.5 years the Republicans were in charge, 100 during the less than a year and a half the Democrats were in charge, and I was chairman. So we've shown that we're willing to move. Contrast that to only 65 allowed to President Obama's. We have to do better. So when we approach it, we can reduce vacancies from historically high levels. Again, I commend both the majority leader and the Republican leader for moving forward with this. And, Mr. President, I would yield the floor, reserve the balance of my time and my voice.
Mr. President.
Senator from Tennessee.
Mr. President, thank you, and I thank the Senator from Vermont, and I'll be very brief. I know today the President has put forth the administration's proposal on the budget, and I know a lot of people on both sides of the aisle have spent a tremendous amount of time over the course of this last year.
Senator, just yield for a moment. I assume you're speaking on the time reserved for the Republican side.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for being so fastidious. Mr. President, back to what I was talking about. I know that a lot of people on both sides of the aisle have spent a great deal of time looking at ways for us to lessen, if not close, the tremendous amount of deficit that we have in this country. And I think everybody understands what a threat this is to our economic security, candidly, I believe, to our national security. And I think many of us have paid close attention to what's happened to other countries who certainly are in this type of situation. I think there's a strong sense on both sides of the aisle, and becoming even stronger, that this is an issue we as a country have to deal with. And Mr. President, the thing that's unique about, I think, the issue of this fiscal deficit that our country has, this is something that's totally within our hands. In other words, we can deal with this. This is not like some of the situations we deal with in Afghanistan or other places where it takes others, if you will, working with us to ensure that our efforts there are successful. This is something that we as a Congress can solve. Unlike, again, the economy. The economy requires private sector investment and people doing things outside of this body to really create the kind of prosperity we'd like to see. This is totally within our control. So, Mr. President, I really do try to look at the bright side of things. I want to say that, on the other hand, I was disappointed to see the President's budget today and the lack of urgency that was displayed there, the lack of concern. I think what that means is that those of us in this body and those of us in the House are going to have to, as we should, deal with this issue. I think it's much more difficult when you're dealing with a national crisis not to have the administration pulling along with you. And it's my hope that even though I think the President did miss an opportunity to lead on this issue, I do hope that over the course of the next several months that they will come to the table and deal with this issue in a responsible way with both the House and Senate. So, Mr. President, I want to again urge us. I know the House is wrestling with these issues right now, and my guess is that by the time they get ready for recess here this weekend, they will send over something that deals with some cuts in discretionary spending. I think we all know we have to deal with the entire budget if we're actually going to make the type of headway that all of us know needs to be made. But I do hope that what we will do this spring early is go ahead and vote and pass on some very large reductions in spending. I'd like to, again, hope that we'll pass something like the CAP Act that Claire McCaskill and I have co-sponsored that takes us from where we are in spending relative to our country's economic output down to the 40-year average, which I would think most people in this body would consider to be a reasonable approach over a 10-year period that would be a straitjacket on Congress to ensure that we actually make those cuts. So those are two steps that need to occur. And it's my hope that the administration, after putting forth what has been put forth, that they will join us in this effort. Mr. President, I think all of us know that for us to deal with the big issues of this country, it's going to take the executive branch, the House, and the Senate. We've got divided government. This is a perfect opportunity for us as a country to deal with this huge issue that really threatens certainly the future of these young people sitting before me, but threatens our country's economic security and our national security. So, Mr. President, I thank you for the time. I hope that all of us will deal with this in a serious, sober, and responsible manner. I think we've got several months over which we have a tremendous opportunity to come together and do the right thing as it relates to our country's economic and fiscal situation. And with that, I yield the floor. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President?
The Senator from California.
Thank you very much. What is the order right now?
The Senate is concurrently debating two nominations.
Okay. Is it appropriate that I speak on one of those nominations but also make some comments about the budget?
The senator is recognized.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, I am very happy today to know that we're about to cast a vote on Edward Davila, nominee for the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California. And this is a wonderful nominee, and he deserved this up or down vote. I'm convinced he's going to get an overwhelming vote, and I'm going to speak to that in a moment. But Senator from Tennessee was critical of President Obama's budget, and I wanted to just make a response to that. The senator from Tennessee is not the only Republican to criticize President Obama's budget. They're all reading out of the same playbook. And I just have to say, while no one agrees with every line in that budget, I certainly don't, the basis of the budget is critical, and this is the basis of the budget. The President is addressing the deficit in a very responsible way, freezing domestic discretionary spending, very tough, cutting billions and billions and billions of dollars of red ink, while not jeopardizing the economic recovery that we are in the midst of. And to me, it's very interesting because I had the privilege of being here in this body the last time we balanced the budget. As far as I know, I don't recall any Republicans voting for Bill Clinton's budget. Maybe there were one or two. I don't recall. But that budget was in balance, and we went into surplus. And frankly, we learned how to do it then. And what did we learn? We learned that when you're facing a crisis like this, a budget deficit that's growing too fast, and an economic recovery that you don't want to disrupt, that you have to be responsible. You don't take a meat axe to this economy and cut things just for the sake of telling the American people you met a certain number. Every $1 billion of cuts, that's real people with real jobs. And then the Republicans are criticizing our president for investing in the infrastructure of this country. Mr. President, you and I know you can't have a great nation if you can't move goods, if you can't move people, if people are stuck in traffic, if you have a sewer system that's overflowing, a water system that's antiquated, and you have millions of people who can't get access to broadband and the Internet. We all know the value of that. So I would say to my Republican friends, please don't be against something simply because our president's for it. He's reaching out his hand. Don't give him the back of your hand. And, I'm very optimistic we can work together. I'm certainly so pleased that the president has reached out his hand. And Republicans and Democrats have reached out their hands, too, in this Congress. I'm pleased to say on the highway bill, I'm working very closely with Congressman Mica, who's the chairman of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee in the House. I'm working with Jim Inhofe, my friend and ranking member of the committee. And so let's, in our rhetoric, not each go to our corners. Let's welcome this president's budget. Let's take a look at it. Let's ask economists what is the impact of cutting so much that you derail the economic recovery. We can do this. We did it under Bill Clinton. We balanced the budget and created 23 million jobs. Under George W. Bush, that was gone in 5 minutes. Tax cuts to the people who didn't need it. And with it, a horrible economic recession, which this president, President Obama, stepped up to the plate without much help from the other side. A couple, yes, helped us. And I'm preparing a little presentation on what we did and what was the impact. We had capitalism on the brink of failure, and this president had the courage. There were calls from the Republican side of the aisle to nationalize the banks. I remember that. And President Obama said, no way. We're not going to do that. And has it been rough? Has it been tough? Horribly so. My state suffering from this mortgage crisis. We have to do more. We all know that. But economists are saying that we are moving forward. We turn the corner. And therefore, I think this chorus of negativity coming from the Republicans toward our president, when he was able to take the worst recession since the Great Depression and bring us back to a stable situation, let's work together. Let's not, heat up this rhetoric. We can do this. We did it before. We know how to wrap our arms around this deficit, and we know how to grow jobs. So let's take a page out of that book. It means that you take bold steps, but you don't go so far, so fast that you derail economic recovery. We can do this. The attack by the other side on the Environmental Protection Agency is unbelievable. I saw a cartoon, Mr. President, in the Gannett papers in my hometown. It had a drawing of an elephant representing the Republican Party. And in the elephant's trunk was a can that was obviously poison. It had skull and bones on it, spraying the flowers, the trees, the air. And under the Republican logo, it said Environmental Destruction Agency. That they call the Republican Party the Environmental Destruction Agency. They have cut a third, that's their proposal, a third of the EPA's budget. Now, when I go out to talk to people, not one of them ever said to me, the air is too clean, Senator. Make it dirtier. My kid only missed 2 days from this school year. And I want dirty air. Nobody ever said, I want unhealthful water. Nobody ever told me they want to live close to a Superfund site. So I say to my friends, watch out what you're doing. You're taking a meat axe to the Environmental Protection Agency that protects the health and the safety and the well-being of our children and our families. If you can't breathe, you can't work. You notice that? You lose time out, you lose time from work. So let's be careful here. Let's not be radical. Let's not be extreme. That is not what the people sent us here to do. And they certainly didn't send us here to take away a woman's right to choose. They sent us here to work on this economic recovery, and we've got proposals over there on the other side that are unbelievable, that would raise taxes on people who have health care policies. Can you imagine? They want to raise taxes on small businesses that have health policies that cover reproductive health care for women. I didn't think that's what this election was about. I thought it was about getting jobs in this economy. So between that and the overreaching on the budget, we got a lot of work to do. And I say it with due respect. I really do. But the American people are going to need to weigh in on this. They're going to need to say how much is too much, what their values are. Richard Nixon signed the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. Republican presidents signed these acts, and now the Republicans are trying to destroy these important bipartisan accomplishments. You know why, they say? It kills jobs. Guess what? We heard the same thing, the people who tried to stop the Clean Air Act, the polluters. They said it's going to cost jobs. We had our greatest economic growth after that period. Guess what? Jobs are created when you clean up the air. Jobs are created, technologies that we can export when you find ways to make drinking water safe. So, frankly, I'm energized by this debate because, you know, I believe there are differences in the parties. And I think that's okay. It's fine. So I'll be involved in the debate. I'm sure my colleagues on the other side who disagree will put forward their view. They're trying to take away the power of the Environmental Protection Agency to enforce standards on carbon pollution, dangerous, dangerous carbon pollution that the Bush administration told us through their work put our people in danger, put our families in danger, put our country in danger, put our economy in danger. They are actually trying to stop the EPA from enforcing the Clean Air Act. Again, I don't know one constituent that ever told me that they thought the air was too clean or the water was too safe to drink. So this is a bit of a preview. But on the very bright side today, it is my honor to support the nomination of Judge Edward Davila as the Senate prepares to vote on his confirmation to become a district court judge. I want to congratulate him and his family on this important day. I've had the privilege of recommending Judge Davila to President Obama to serve on the Northern District Court of California. He is respected by his colleagues and those who appear before him, and he will make an excellent addition to the bench. This is a critical vacancy to fill. The Northern District has been designated a judicial emergency by the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts. Let me say that again. The Northern District of California has been designated a judicial emergency. We don't have enough judges, and it's another area we must work better together. I'm hopeful on this one that we can. I'm pleased that we're voting on Judge Davila today. And when he is confirmed, Judge Davila will be the only Latino serving on the Northern District Court. And that's important. Our state is so diverse. It's extraordinary. And we just need everybody feeling that they are represented. The judge is outstanding. He brings an impressive background of service in both public service and private practice. Judge Davila was born in Palo Alto, one of 3 children raised by a single mother. A single mother. It is from his mother, Dora, that he learned the important qualities that have served him well, and he defines those as hard work and determination. And I would like to extend my personal congratulations to Dora. As a mother, I know the immense pride she must feel for her son and his extraordinary accomplishments. Judge Davila is a graduate of the California State University at San Diego and the University of California's Hastings College of Law in San Francisco. He's practiced law for nearly 3 decades, spending his first 7 years as a Santa Clara County public defender before moving into the private sector as a co-owner of a small firm specializing in criminal defense. During his time as a defense counsel, Judge Davila earned the respect of prosecutors and law enforcement officials with whom he interacted, and he received awards from the State Bar of California. And he served as president of the Santa Clara Bar Association in 1998. Since 2001, he has served on the Santa Clara County Superior Court, where he's drawn praise from fellow judges and lawyers for his hard work, his integrity, and his fairness. In a recent survey by the Santa Clara County Bar Association, his performance was rated excellent or good by a huge percentage of participants with respect to his work ethic, his knowledge of the law, his knowledge of procedure, integrity, dispute resolution, and his judicial temperament, which we know is so important. He's also received awards in recognition for his judicial performance from the Santa Clara Bar Association and the California State Assembly. So I will close my remarks today by congratulating Judge Davila and his entire family on this momentous day. Here's another example of the American dream, and I urge my colleagues in the Senate to join me in voting to confirm this highly qualified nominee to the federal bench. Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I ask unanimous consent that my remarks on the budget appear in the record at the appropriate place.
Without objection.
Thank you, and I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Akaka. The senator from Mississippi.
Mr. President, I rise today in strong support of Justice Graves. Am I recognized to
Senator,
speak on that purpose?
We are currently in a quorum call.
I ask that the quorum call be dispensed with, and I ask unanimous consent that it be.
Without objection. The senator from Mississippi.
Thank you. And now, I will state to the President and to members that I rise in strong support of the nomination of Mississippi Supreme Court Justice James Graves to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. I want to thank all of those on both sides of the aisle who have worked to get this vote scheduled and to bring us to this moment today where I'm confident that Justice Graves will be confirmed. When that happens today, and when he takes the oath, Justice Graves will bring a rich and distinguished background of public service to the Fifth Circuit. He is a Mississippi native. He graduated as valedictorian of Sumner High School in the small Delta town of Sumner and went on to receive his bachelor's degree from Millsaps College before going to law school at Syracuse University. Justice Graves currently presides as a justice on the Mississippi Supreme Court, where he has faithfully served since his appointment in 2001 and his subsequent election in 2004. Before being appointed to the Mississippi Supreme Court, Justice Graves served as a circuit court judge in Hinds County, Mississippi for 10 years. Justice Graves is a dedicated family man and community volunteer. He has been honored on numerous occasions with awards recognizing his public service. Those who know him know that he is particularly committed to teaching and motivating young people, particularly the young people of my state of Mississippi. And I'm confident that even in this position of increased responsibility and visibility, he'll continue taking time to work with our nation's young people. So I'm proud today to speak on behalf of Justice Graves. I urge my colleagues to vote in support of his nomination to the Fifth Circuit. And I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Akaka.